Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're zooming in on a place where raw human endurance literally collides with absolute aviation mastery. We're talking about the Siachen Glacier, widely known as the highest, coldest battlefield on Earth. Now, this isn't just some lesson in military strategy. No, it's a sheer masterclass in extreme survival and logistical genius. If you've ever wanted to know where the absolute limits of human biology and mechanical engineering meet, well, you're in the right place. Let's get into it.
Okay, so to truly wrap our heads around what it means to operate up in Siachen, we've got to start with the baseline environment. And it is brutal. In the winter, the baseline temperature drops to a staggering minus 50 degrees Celsius. But actually scratch that. That's just what the thermometer says. When you factor in the relentless winds up there, the wind chill can plunge the effective temperature down to a flesh-freezing minus 70 degrees. This is an environment that is actively, aggressively hostile to human life.
And you know, it's not even just the cold. We're talking about operating on the literal roof of the world. The highest military posts on this glacier sit at an absolutely unbelievable 22,000 feet above sea level. Just to put that into perspective, even the lowest parts of the glacier are sitting way up above 11,000 feet. Simply existing at this altitude, let alone trying to conduct complex military and logistical operations, is a constant minute-by-minute battle for basic survival.
Now take that insane altitude, add in the bone-chilling cold, and combine it with this: winds that literally roar at 160 kilometers per hour. That is the sheer, terrifying force of the freezing gales that sweep across the ice. So before we even touch on the aircraft or the people involved, we really have to recognize the environment itself as this formidable antagonist. It's a ruthless, unforgiving landscape where there is absolutely zero margin for error. None.
All of this brings us to our first main section, the aerial lifeline, and the truly monumental task of actually supplying Siachen.
So, think about it. How do you supply troops spread out across a massive 74-kilometer glacier when there are zero roads? The sky is literally the only lifeline. Let's think about the heavy lifting required just to get supplies from a major hub like Delhi up to the gateway base in Leh. If you needed to move 45 tons of crucial supplies by road, you'd be looking at about 25 massive trucks, a huge amount of manpower, and a full week of travel time. But if you use the 128-ton C-17 Globemaster aircraft, it's a total game changer. A highly efficient ground crew can load those 45 tons in under 45 minutes, and the flight to Leh takes just 50 minutes. It's just a stunning display of brute force meeting essential efficiency.
To make this entire system work, you need an incredibly specific ecosystem of machines. It's like a giant puzzle. First, you've got the C-17 Globemaster III bringing in massive 77-ton loads. Then, the Mi-17 V5 helicopters take over the relay, pushing up to 20,000 feet with 4-ton payloads. For the absolute highest, most treacherous posts, they have to rely on the incredibly agile Cheetah helicopters, which are capable of reaching up to 23,000 feet. And, keeping a watchful eye over this entire airspace are the Sukhoi Su-30 MKIs, executing Mach 2+ all-weather patrols. It really is a perfectly choreographed, high-altitude mechanical ballet.
But hey, let's shift our focus away from the heavy, unyielding machines for a second and move into part 2, the physical toll at 10% oxygen.
Because at the end of the day, when you ask a fragile human body to operate at these extreme heights, they're only pulling in about 10% of the oxygen they normally get at sea level. Because of this, severe medical hazards are just an everyday reality. You have hypoxia, where body tissues are literally starved of oxygen. Then, there are these terrifying life-threatening conditions like high-altitude pulmonary edema and cerebral edema, which is basically fluid building up in the lungs and the brain. And if that wasn't enough, add in severe frostbite, extreme sunburn from those harsh, high-altitude UV rays, sleep disorders, and even memory loss. It gets to the point where even basic activities, just walking or eating a meal, turn into these monumental physical challenges.
And because of these terrifying physical conditions, the stakes are just incredibly high. On average, every single month, 15 to 17 emergency medical evacuation cases have to be brought down from the glacier. Think about that for a second. 15 to 17 emergencies a month. That number is a stark, sobering reminder of the very real human cost up there and the constant, urgent need for reliable aerial extraction.
So who on Earth actually flies these incredibly dangerous extraction missions? Well, that brings us to part 3, forging a glacier captain.
Getting certified for this is no joke. It takes an agonizing 8 to 10 months of intense, highly specialized training. Way before they ever even touch down on the glacier itself, trainees like Flight Lieutenant Anirudh Grover have to practice under veteran instructors like Squadron Leader Khushbu Gupta. They use this crazy setup in Leh called the Pillar Helipad. It's essentially this tiny elevated platform about 20 feet off the ground, and it's practically no bigger than a matchbox. They have to practice landing on this thing over and over and over again. Why? To perfectly mimic the zero-margin, terrifyingly small helipads carved directly out of the ice up on the actual glacier.
But here's the thing. Elite flying skills alone just aren't enough. I mean, what happens if the aircraft goes down in a whiteout? Pilots also have to undergo grueling wilderness survival training. Just consider the steps from Flight Lieutenant Hemant's training. If they get stranded, they literally have to know how to build an emergency igloo from scratch. First, finding flat ground, then compressing the snow with their boots, carving out ice bricks using a cookery knife, and finally packing in soft snow to act as cement. And what about staying alive without food? They actually learn to boil pine leaves to create this makeshift tea that's rich in vitamin C, just to get basic sustenance and energy. It is raw, gritty survival in every sense of the word.
Now, of course, absolutely none of these pilots are flying anywhere without our next section, Part 4, the unsung heroes, the ground crew.
These are the maintenance technicians out there working directly in the freezing elements at Leh Air Force Base. I really want you to absorb this quote from the pilots. "My first faith is my God, but my technician comes a close second." That hits hard, doesn't it? It highlights this profound, deep-seated trust between the air crew and the ground crew. Take Sergeant H.K. Sharma, for example. To do his job, to properly maintain these aircraft, he often has to take off his specially designed cold-weather gloves just so he can actually feel the sub-zero metal parts. And sometimes, the metal is so unbelievably cold that his bare skin literally sticks to it and tears away. They bleed to keep these aircraft safe. That's true dedication right there.
So why endure all of this pain and risk? Well, that leads us to Part 5, the ultimate payoff, saving lives. Consider this incredible timeline of a rescue mission led by Wing Commander Khan. You see, the Air Force doesn't just evacuate military personnel. A lot of times they are quite literally the only hope for isolated civilians in the region. At 3:30 p.m., they get an emergency call, a civilian with critically low blood pressure. The catch? They have a super tight 2.5-hour window before the sun sets and flying becomes completely impossible. And with no official helipad in this remote village, they have to completely improvise an uncharted landing right in the middle of a farmer's field, all while the daylight is rapidly fading. But they do it. They secured a patient, fly out, and successfully transfer him to a waiting ambulance. Life saved. The amount of pressure and rapid decision-making required in a moment like that is just, it's phenomenal. And, beyond those dramatic, high-stakes medical rescues, there's also a deep, quiet, emotional payoff for these crews. Just the act of dropping off vital rations, heating fuel, and, crucially, letters from home to soldiers who are completely isolated in a frozen wasteland. The pilots themselves talk about this. They say that the look of pure gratitude in a soldier's eyes when they hear the sound of that helicopter approaching, delivering a literal lifeline to the outside world, brings this indescribable satisfaction. Really, it's the fuel that pushes them to fly right back into the danger, day after day after day. We've looked at the brutal data, the massive logistical machines, and the incredibly heavy physical toll. But at its core, this explainer is really about the immense human spirit cutting through a silent, totally unforgiving expanse. So I'll leave you with this to think about. The next time you hear about a logistical marvel, consider the icy, brutal silence of Siachen and ask yourself, can you hear the flight of hope? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep seeking to understand the incredible world around us. See you next time.